It's frequently decried that originality is dead in Hollywood. Everything now is all about sequels, remakes, and reboots, and arguably no genre suffers with this as much as horror. However, as the occasional remake proves, like Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead for instance, they're not all bad, and some in fact serve up a fine alternate vision which stands perfectly well on its own. So with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 horror movies that actually need remakes. Number 10, Urban Legend. In this admittedly original horror flick, a killer appears to be acting out numerous different urban legends during his killings. Yet, what could have been a subversive stab at the genre is ultimately surprisingly dull, lacking in self-awareness, and involves legends that too few audience members are likely to have even heard of. In addition, the characters are kinda terrible, it's not that scary, and the ending absolutely blows. It is a cool idea though, and one which would probably be a lot more effective in the social media age where information is a lot more pervasive. With his smart screenplay, which admits its own absurdity while boasting Scream-like meta-humor, a new take on urban legend could shake the horror genre up. Sadly, despite some cult success today, it's unclear whether studios would be interested in something like Urban Legends. We've had a lot of meta-horror movies since this launched, and you kind of feel like if it was going to be remade, it probably would have been by now. Number 9, 30 Days of Night. David Slade's 30 Days of Night was a vampire movie that didn't really do much at the time, but if you ask horror fans today, they'll have nothing but nice things to say about it. It's funny how time works, isn't it? This Josh Hartnett starring horror has an incredible premise. An Alaskan town suffers through a 30-day winter every year, which makes it the perfect time for a band of sun-hating vampires to descend on it for an incredibly bloody spot of vacationing. The original still is absolutely worth watching, don't get me wrong, but you just can't quite escape the feeling that the premise deserves something longer form. The 30 days get a bit too condensed, certain actions feel rushed, and the terror doesn't really get a chance to breathe. So while a remake could up the intensity, it might even be better for this one to be turned into a limited series. There's so much potential here, both in the original film and the graphic novel it's based on, that it's a shame to see it stay dead 15 years later. And yes, I can't believe it's been 15 years either. Number 8, The Stuff. The Stuff is an amusing B-movie satire about a white ice cream-like substance discovered in the ground and marketed just as the stuff, which, with its purported lack of calories, looks to put ice cream out of business. However, surprise, the stuff is actually a parasitic organism that eats its consumers from within. It's goofy and it knows it, and the result is a whole load of fun. Though the stuff is generally well regarded today, it hasn't really aged especially well at all. The acting is a tad embarrassing and the effects are a mixed bag, but that's kind of why people love it. The ripe satire of consumerism, though, is as potent as ever, and could be majorly ramped up with a remake. While it might not have worked a few years ago, the time is right now for something completely bonkers like this. In the past few years alone, we've had movies about killer pairs of jeans, a killer dress, and so much more. So now, it's time for the stuff to return and give us a good helping of body horror madness. Number 7, Truth or Dare. Truth or Dare is one of the more recent movies on this list, but it's also one of the most hated. The film about, you guessed it, a supernaturally deadly game of Truth or Dare was absolutely trashed by audiences and critics at the time. It was too dumb, too goofy, and nowhere near scary enough to get people invested. Still, it made nearly $100 million worldwide, proving that enough of us thought the concept alone had enough in the tank to make for a potentially really good movie. And that's why we need a remake. While there are no shortage of horrors based around dares and pranks, Truth or Dare is so simple yet so effective for a reason. It could make for a great, intense, small-scale experience. On top of imaginative dares, if you make this an isolated claustrophobic story with interesting characters, the reveals in the truths themselves could be just as engaging as any of the blood and guts. Wrap a mystery story around this framing and throw in some good set pieces, you should have a recipe for success. You should have it anyway. Number 6, Dog Soldiers. Listen, Dog Soldiers absolutely slaps. This story about a bunch of military idiot men accidentally finding themselves hunted by a bunch of werewolves is the very definition of a cult classic, and is always in the conversation when people talk about their favorite movies in this subgenre. And honestly, this one kinda just makes it on the list by default because there simply aren't enough werewolf movies, not enough good ones anyway. Neil Marshall's initial film approached these villains with a brutal ferocity that makes this kind of film so enjoyable in the first place. Though you only see flashes of them, they're practically practical bodies and strangely elegant movements make their appearances frighteningly distinct, and it sucks that we didn't get any sort of proper follow-up. A remake of Dog Soldiers then doesn't even have to change much around. The core concept still works. Just give the director a bigger budget, the ability to go all in on the gore, and keep things practical. Essentially, give it the Evil Dead treatment. Number 5, Jennifer's Body. Back when people still cared about Megan Fox for her acting, and not just because of the mad stuff that her and Machine Gun Kelly get up to, Jennifer's Body was one of her most misunderstood movies. At the time, it was very much marketed like a late 2000s horror movie that had Megan Fox in it. That being that it pretty much came across as something of a raunchy horror with a sex symbol actress in the lead role. This was at the chagrin of writer Diablo Cody and director Karen Kasuma though, who had made Jennifer's Body as a feminist movie to be embraced by women, a demographic that Hollywood was wildly uninterested in appealing to at the time in this genre. The film itself still does work to this day and has since been reappreciated as more than it was initially written off as. But you still get the sense that if it was made now, the film could be unashamedly itself without any kind of compromise. Hell, even Megan Fox herself is on the rise again, so get her back somehow. The cast was great, the creatives were great, let's go again for a round 2. Number 4, Creep. In Creep, not the Netflix Mark Duplass horror that we like to talk about quite a lot on this channel, the other one, a young German woman called Kate ends up falling asleep in a London Underground tube station and wakes up to find it empty with a monstrous killer hunting her from the sewers below. Despite a great setting and some atmospheric chills, this slasher is kind of underbaked, wasting an otherwise excellent premise with the kind of early 2000s melodrama that bogged down so many films at the time. The premise is so brilliant though that it would be a shame to just waste it on one mediocre horror film. Any Londoner can relate to the abject terror Kate feels upon waking up in the abandoned tube station, and as a leaner, meaner remake, the filmmakers could absolutely nail it. Sadly, because this flick came and went without much fanfare, it is tough to imagine anyone taking an interest in it now. It still has its champions though. I mean, Ryan Hollinger made a really good video about it, so here's to never saying never. Number 3, Fade to Black. This 1980 horror film follows a lonely cinephile whose derangement causes him to go on a killing spree dressed up as a number of his favourite movie characters, all the while stalking a Marilyn Monroe impersonator who has become the object of his affections. Undeniably original during a period where horror was pretty much anything but that, Fade to Black presented a fantastic premise, though the execution was a little awkward, and so it became more of a curio than anything more. The premise is a classic though, and given how cinema has evolved over the past 40 years, a contemporary spin would have so much more to riff on. While the original movie picked relatively niche films to homage, a new take should pick up on more popular movies that mainstream audiences would be familiar with. Of course, that's more of a pipe dream than anything that would happen in real life because first and foremost, there are those pesky legal matters with sending up classic horror icons, though most of them probably would be covered under parody fair use. Still, we live in the age of multiverse crossovers, and it's only a matter of time until horror gets in on the action. Number 2, Idle Hands. A 1999 comic horror following a young stoner whose hand becomes possessed and goes on a killing spree. Despite a talented cast, including Seth Green and Jessica Alba, Idle Hands never manages to combine its comedy and gore in a truly effective way, even if the movie does endure as something of a cult favourite. The idea is just fine though, and with the right execution, the movie could certainly be a hit. The original hints at occasional moments of insane inspiration, but they're sadly mostly lost among terrible slapstick. Ramp up the satire, make it feel more like a high school movie and focus the narrative a little bit, and the end result might just work though. Sadly, this one is very unlikely. Though Idle Hands sold well on DVD, it only made $4.1 million at the box office with a $25 million budget, which makes it far too risky for any studio to want to touch today. Plus, when you can churn out super serious, unimaginative horror that destroys the box office, why even bother trying something a little different? Number 1, Resident Evil. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Josh, Resident Evil has already just had a reboot with Welcome to Raccoon City, and yeah, you're right. But it's a testament to just how much that movie missed the mark that I'm already begging for a new one mere months later. And that's because the new movie not only made the cardinal sin of wasting the potential of the source material, but it wasted 3 movies worth. Instead of sticking to one game to adapt, the recent release rushed through the plots of 1, 2, Nemesis, and even threw teasers towards Code Veronica X in there for good measure. Which is all to say, Why? Why rush through these stories when they can easily hold their own films? Why not remake the series and go game by game, starting in the Spencer Mansion before moving to Raccoon City and introducing Nemesis? There is so much material in here that fans want to see on the big screen, so many characters waiting to be brought to life, and movie studios just don't seem to get it. At least Paul W.S. Anderson's movies were fun is all I'm saying. They might have hated the source material more, but at least they were a good time. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What would you think of these movies being remade? And are there any ones that you want to see get the reboot treatment? While you're down there as well, could you please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to What Culture Horror for more lists like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.